Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you are tuning in. Thank you for joining the Speedster's live chat. This is a weekly live stream dedicated to helping cyclists, triathletes train smarter and go faster. There's something very special about today's edition of the live chat. This is actually pre-recorded because I have some family commitments this weekend that I couldn't bring you live. But however, we have recorded this together with Mr. Mathew Inness, all the way from Queensland, Australia. And today we are talking about whether cyclists, triathletes, should you hit the gym? Should you spend time benching? Should you spend time doing your back squat? Does that help? Now let's talk to Mathew himself. Hi Mathew, how are you doing?
Good, thanks. How are you?
This is I'm good too. I heard that there's a bit of a lockdown in Melbourne. Which part of the country are you at right now?
So at the moment on the Gold Coast, the whole Australian Football League, so the AFL has been moved to Queensland because Melbourne's having a really bad time with COVID. So they've moved the whole competition out of Melbourne, and we're based in a hotel up here on the Gold Coast. We can't really leave the hotel at the moment. So we're all playing our games up here.
So it's a bit of like a house arrest. You can still play your games, you can still do your work, but I guess movement is pretty restricted too. Everyone is very careful.
Yeah, so we can only leave the hotel to train or to play, and if we need to leave it for any type of exercise, we can do that as well. But it's pretty much we have to stay in the hotel. We get COVID tested twice a week, and they're pretty strict on what we do.
Wow. Well, that is good to have the right processes in place to safeguard the health and the safety of everyone that is involved. So, Matt, you have very interesting career. You were a professional cricketer, and then you were into track cycling, and you are now a performance coach with a football team. But you also coach, you also help the Malaysian Olympic track cycling team in strength and conditioning. So perhaps you can walk us through your background and how did you get to where you are today?
Yeah, so as you said, I used to be an athlete, so a cricketer. So from about the age of 18, I was a professional cricketer. When I was playing cricket, I went to uni, did my undergraduate in sports science, and then, so I played cricket professionally up until I was 30 years of age, when I retired to move on with the next phase of my life. So when I was still playing cricket, I did a master's in strength and conditioning, and then at the same time, as you mentioned, I was doing a bit of stuff with some track cyclists over in Perth, Western Australia. And when I retired from cricket, I moved into it as a strength and conditioning coach with Western Australian cricket team. I actually travelled to KL a couple of times to play some cricket over there, which was good.
Wow.
And yeah, it was good. So I got to travel around the world with cricket. And then when I retired, moved into strength and conditioning with cricket, and I moved over back to Melbourne to start a PhD with the Western Bulldogs and Victoria University. So the PhD I did was in altitude training, which obviously has relevance to a lot of the people who you would come in contact with. So I did a PhD in altitude training. At the same time, I was a strength and conditioning coach at the Western Bulldogs. And then I got to know the Malaysian track cycling team's head coach, John Beasley, through a good mate of mine, Gary Niwan, who some people might know as a ex-world champion on the track.
Yes.
And then from there, so John asked me to be the senior strength and conditioning coach with the Malaysian team. So I've been with them since early 2017, so just about 3.5 years. And with the Western Bulldogs, I'm the performance manager there. So I'm in charge of all the strength and conditioning, all the sports science, basically everything to do with physical performance for the team. That's my area.
Wonderful. Now, you have a wide spectrum of experience with cricket, with football, and with track cycling, and obviously all three sports are quite different. Now, can you tell us what do these sports have in common in terms of being in the gym, in terms of training in the gym?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, they all have their differences. So when I think about training an athlete, I think about the 4 pillars. So the psychological, the physical, the mental, and the tactical. So they're the 4 areas that you always think about when training an athlete.
Yes.
And all sports have them 4 areas involved in them, but some obviously have a bit of a bigger mix than others. So you think about cricket's a lot more technical and tactical in terms. It's not as much of a, I guess, of a speed or endurance type sport. It's more about a skill-based sport.
Yes.
Australian football is a really high mix of everything, whereas track cycling is very much about, in my area anyway, about the physical, about trying to make the athletes as strong as possible to produce as much power as they can. So they're all have their similarities, but I guess the mixture of those four areas depends on the sport you're in. But in essence, if you look at the comparisons, I guess for me, in my area, the more powerful an athlete is, the more force they can produce. That helps them in whatever sporting endeavour they compete in.
Yeah. Speaking about strength and speed, obviously, if you want to go fast on a bike, you need to have stronger muscles. And to have stronger muscles, you spend time in the gym. Is there a way that you test? Because as a performance coach, I bet that you are into evidence. What evidence do we see that strength and conditioning, the time in the gym, actually contributes to performance on the track? Now, what are the evidences that you have seen in your career?
Yeah, so it's an interesting one. I guess performance is multifactorial, as I spoke about before. So the four pillars I recently spoke about, but if you just take out the physical pillar, I suppose, and even in that physical pillar, there's a whole range of things that can contribute it. So just because you can squat 200 kilos in the gym doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be able to produce 2,000 watts on the track. Some people who aren't quite as strong in the gym can produce more on the track. But what we do is I work really closely with the coach, so John Beasley and also Scott Gardner. So I work really closely with those two guys about what they're trying to focus on the track, and then try and complement that in the gym. So I don't think that just by getting strong is going to make you, that's not the only reason you're going to be powerful and good on the track. There's a whole range of things, but it can help complement what you do on the track. So I guess we look at things, if an athlete, a track cyclist does increase, we look at DEXA scans, which is one way of looking at muscle, increased muscle mass. So if we look at DEXA scans, they do increase their muscle mass in their legs. And if that contributes to an increase in power output on the track, we can say that that's potentially helped that athlete improve.
Okay, so that's very interesting. So on one hand, you are saying that to be able to back squat 200 kilos doesn't necessarily mean that you can output 2,000 watts. But on the other hand, you have evidence that shows you that increase in muscle mass, which we can measure in a DEXA scan, the gold standard of body composition analysis. So with the DEXA scan, you see that an increase in muscle mass correlates to an increase in power output. So in some ways it is direct, in other ways it is not so direct. Would that be accurate?
Yeah, I guess by saying that, I guess I mean that everyone has a different, just because you've got a certain amount of muscle mass it's not a direct correlation to say you're going to produce this much power. But what it does mean is if you increase your muscle mass, then whatever your power was, I guess the theory is that you should be able to produce more power with more muscle. So two people with the same size quads are not going to produce the same amount of power. But if you have someone who has a certain muscle mass and you increase his muscle mass, or he or she's muscle mass, in theory, in a simplistic form, they should be able to produce more power on the bike. Yeah,
that is a good point. So you're saying that two-person being able to back squat 200 kilos doesn't mean that they're going to output the same kind of wattage on the bike.
Yeah.
That, however, if a rider has increased the muscle mass from, say, January to now in July, if there's a 10% increase in muscle mass, for example, there should be an increase in power output. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying. Yep.
Wonderful. Now, the other thing is your area of working is more with sprinters, with a sprinting team in track cyclists, track sprinters. So those are typically short events, explosives. You go really, really fast, like you're hitting 70, 80 kilometers per hour, that kind of crazy speed. But what about strength and conditioning for endurance athletes? How would that differ from? Would that be different, or would there be any similarities between how you you strength and condition a sprinter versus an endurance athlete or a triathlete?
Yeah, so I guess that the goal is going to be slightly different. So depending on what the event is and what the athlete is, depends on what you're trying to target in the gym. So there is a slight difference in the thing you're looking at. So for an endurance athlete, there's a fair bit of research out there that says increased strength in the gym correlates to greater economy or greater efficiency on the bike. So basically it means less oxygen used for a given workload. So if you increase your strength, then in theory, if you're holding, let's just say 300 watts as a number, that 300 watts, you should be using less oxygen to hold that 300 watts. So when you talk about performance for an endurance athlete who's more of a steady state compared to a peak power athlete, it's more the sub-maximal efficiency does improve if you get stronger in the gym.
Wow, that is great news, because I know, for example, I know people that spend loads and loads of money into like keto supplements, and that supplements in order to increase the efficiency of fat combustion, for example. But what you're talking about here is actually, I mean, the jury is still out on, keto or not keto. It's a whole new debate, and which we're not going to get into. But what you're proposing here is actually proven that an increase in strength increases our economy and decreases the usage of oxygen. Would there lead to a more efficient use of energy as well? I mean, for endurance sports, the energy consumption is supremely important. Like, people want to train themselves to use less carbs so that they can last longer on their event. Will an increase in strength have any effect on that, Matt?
I'm not too sure about the energy utilization, whether increased strength does affect that. It's more just to do around sub-maximal, I guess, efficiency. Yeah, so it's more that area, that rather than whether it's going to save carbohydrate and glycogen usage for later in the race. I'm not too sure on that. Yeah.
Sure. Now there is also the thing when we talk about economy. Are you talking about being more efficient on the bike? How do you quantify that economy in terms of when you gain strength and you say that we actually gain economy? So besides utilizing less oxygen, what other forms of economy that perhaps you have seen?
Yeah, I guess if you think about it from a really simplistic point of view, so if you talk about, so if you increase your strength, so if we go to 300 watts again, so if you're producing 300 watts on the bike in a time trial or whatever, and your peak power or your peak strength is at a certain, so if you increase your peak or your threshold or your peak power or increase your strength, then that 300 watts is at a lower relative intensity. So if you're, it's a bit like when you talk about if you increase your threshold from 300 to 320 watts, if you're sitting on 200 watts, well, you're not near threshold, but it's actually at a lower percentage of your threshold. So then, in theory, you're saving the energy that you need for later on in the race when you actually do need to tap into that higher intensity activity.
Yes. Now, as a coach, I have also seen how strength and conditioning change the stability on the bike. Like, I have one particular athlete that struggles when he gets into a time trial position, body rocking all over. But when we have done, 4, 5, 6 months of conditioning in the gym, you can see that there's a remarkable amount of improvement in terms of stability. We can't test it in a lab, but just from eyeball, just from video, the body is not rocking. The body is not like swaying left and right, and that itself is the stability. I would argue is a form of economy, because if we have a F1 car, or a Ferrari that we're driving down the highway, and the car is rattling, that is not economy. That is going to take away speed. That is going to take away performance. Would you agree with that, Matt? What's your take?
Yeah, so I guess if you're talking about body position on the bike, if you haven't got the strength to hold that body position, then if you're talking about aerodynamic drag and that type of stuff, if you can have the greatest position on the bike when you're fresh, but as you get fatigued and if your muscles aren't strong enough to hold that position, then you will start to increase your drag as the race goes on. So that's part of it, and also it's about transferring energy into the pedals. So people will say, well, I don't use my upper body when I ride, so why do I need to do upper body weights? Well, if you're in a sprint, there's actually a lot of force going through in your hands to hold the bike, hold the handlebars in a strong position to be able to transfer that power all the way up through the kinetic chain down into the pedals. So if you haven't got the strength, both upper body and core strength, to transfer the pedal the power into the pedals, then you're going to lose a fair bit through as you said, through the bike rocking, through all that loss of energy up through the kinetic chain.
Exactly. Now, again, let's go back to the F1 car analogy. I'm a big F1 fan, and I know that in Australia, you guys have a couple of very good F1 drivers, Mark Webber and Ricardo, I think.
Yeah.
A big fan of F1. Now, going back to that analogy in F1, so the car going fast is not just about how many horsepower you have in the engine. It has to do with the stability of the car, and the stability of the car has to do with the suspension, the chassis, and the front end, the downforce and all that, right? So if the engine has huge horsepower, but the suspension, the front, if we think about our four limbs, the front, we have two hands, we have two legs, and we think about that as the four wheels of a car. If the front end of the car is not stable, that's not going to get the car very fast, isn't it?
No, that's right.
Is that a fair comparison?
Yeah, it is. And then you even look at if you look at the start of a track sprint, so you look at the team sprint, when they're going from 0 up to 70, 75 kilometers an hour, you can see the first 15 seconds when there's a lot of force going through the upper body to hold the bike stable. Those are really good starters. You can see that their upper body is so rigid, whereas those are a bit more. There's a bit more movement through the upper body. The handlebars move. You can see that there's a lot of force being lost through that, as you said, through that front end of the Formula One car. So what you say is spot on. You need the whole body working in unison, and if there's one part of the body that isn't strong enough to transfer that force, then you're not going to get the most out of yourself.
Yeah, exactly. Now I have this question from a friend of mine that he put down here. Okay, I get this from a lot of cyclists, but this question is from one particular cyclist. Okay, lifting weights is going to increase my body mass. So if I increase my body mass, I become heavier, and my watts per kilo is going to drop. I don't want to be a heavier cyclist. I want to be fast on the climb. What do you say? But I get that a lot, Matt. So I would love if you could take this question.
Yeah, so there's a couple of points to that question. Firstly, we're assuming that by increasing muscle mass, you're not going to increase your force on the bike or your power on the bike. So if you do increase your weight, but you don't increase power on the bike, your watts per kilo will go down. So that's not what you want. So it's about putting the right weight on. That's the first part of it. And secondly, we forget how hard it is to put muscle mass on.
Exactly.
With the amount that the cyclist rides, especially endurance cyclists, if they're riding 500 kilometers plus a week, the ability to put on even 1 kilo of lean mass is actually really hard. So they're the two parts to it. So I'll answer the first part first.
Sure.
If you increase, let's just say you increase 1 kilo in your legs, so you're going to focus more on your legs. You increase 1 kilo of lean mass in your legs. If you got, let's just say we've got a 60 kilo cyclist who's, let's just say they're a really good cyclist, 60 kilos, they can hold 300 watts. So they're 5 watts per kilo. So they're a great cyclist. Okay.
Yep.
Now, if you increase by 1 kilo, they're 61. To maintain that 5 watts per kilo, they need to be at 305 watts. So yes. I'm going to tell you that if you increase your lean muscle mass by 1 kilo, you're going to improve by more than 5 watts at your threshold.
Fantastic point.
Yeah. So even though you might have put on a little bit of weight, then you're going to outweigh the extra weight if it's put on the right spot. If it's put mainly in the legs and glutes, then you'll actually increase your threshold by more than what you're putting on. That's the first part of it. And secondly, how hard it is to put on lean mass. We spent years and years trying to put on lean mass onto athletes, both track cyclists and also footballers. And if they put on 4 or 5 kilos, that's actually that's a big increase in lean mass.
Yes.
And that's without the 500 to 1,000 kilometers a week they're doing on the road.
Yes.
So once you put endurance training on, it makes it really hard to put on lean mass. So I'd say that's so it's a great question, and I imagine you do get a lot, and I get it a lot. But they're the two things. So firstly, if you increase lean mass, you'll be able to produce more power.
Yes.
So your watts per kilo, as long as it's in the right spot, shouldn't go down. It should actually go up. And secondly, it's actually really hard to put on a lot of mass. You're not going to put on 10 kilos of lean mass. No. You're doing the amount of cycling that most endurance cyclists do. Exactly.
It's incredibly hard to put on lean mass. For the general population, I suppose it's we are not active in sports. It's relatively easy to put on fat, to gain weight, but to actually gain lean muscles is incredibly difficult, especially like you said when we train 500-600 kilometers per week. Now, since gaining lean mass is very important for performance in endurance sports, is there a way that we can measure whether we have gained lean mass? Can you recommend some?
So we spoke about the DEXA before, which is the gold standard, but not everyone has access to a DEXA. And the other thing, if we don't have access to a DEXA, is we just do muscle girth. So we'll find landmarks on the body, and we'll just measure the the size of hips, the size of calves, the size of quads, and just keep track of how what these muscle girths are.
Yeah, so that is the easy way to do that. Now, I have another question right here. Let me pull this up. Okay. Now, the other question I get from a lot of cyclists is this. Go to the gym, we do deadlifts, we do leg press, we do calf raises, we do chin ups, bench press, back squat. None of these movement has anything to do with this. It's so different from the cycling motion, right? Why do we still have to do it?
Yeah, so it's another good question, and we also get it with our footballers a lot of the time. And the cricketers I've passed, cricketers especially, used to say, "Well, why am I doing this when I just need to hit the ball?" Which is a good question. I guess what you need to look at is right back at the start when I said that you need to increase the force generating capacity of a muscle. So to do that, you need to increase muscle mass to increase the force generating capacity. So even though a lot of the exercises might not necessarily look exactly like they look on the bike, I know a lot of people try and get a degree of specificity, which makes the movement look like you are on the bike, which is great. Sometimes you just need to be able, the more specific you get to a movement, the less force you can generate from it. So as an example by that, I mean, if you try to do a single leg deadlift as opposed to a double leg deadlift, you need to think about why you're doing the exercise. So the single leg deadlift is more like a cycling movement, but the double leg deadlift is you can actually generate more force. So we use them both, but you need to think about why you're doing it. So if we're in a certain phase of training and we want to do single leg work, a deadlift, if you think about a single leg deadlift on the bike, if you're a track sprinter who's trying to get some starts, when you're trying to pull both arms up in an isometric contraction while using a single leg, well, that's a similar movement. It's not exactly the same, but you're trying to increase the force generating capability of a muscle, which is why you need to try and overload that muscle, which is why you use the gym.
So you are talking about building a strong structure. A stronger athlete is a more powerful athlete, is a higher performance athlete. And we see that with, back to the F1 driver analogy again. We see that in F1 drivers too. They hit the gym, they work really hard with their neck muscles and all that. So that is the same thing. It's to make the athlete stronger so the athlete can perform under the stress that they go under. Now I have another question here. Can you share with us some of the measurable performance gains that strength and conditioning has contributed to cycling?
Yeah, I guess if we talk about performance gains, we're looking at increased power on the track or increased performance in terms of faster times and these type of things. I guess if you look at, and again, right back to my first point, that performance is multifactorial. So the physical, technical, tactical, and mental. So there's them 4 areas. So it'd be really, I guess, naive of me or to say that any performance change we've seen on the track is purely through the gym. We know that there's a lot of areas for it. But if you look at, I guess, some of the improvements that we've seen with the Malaysian guys over the last couple of years. So I know Shah and Azizul, they're both riding, if you look at a flying 200-metre time, and Fadil also, and then Inness, who are the 4 that we mainly work with. Yes. They're all riding personal best flying 200-metre times. I know Azizul, who's over 30, is now riding like a 9.5 or a 9.6 flying 200, whereas 2 years ago he was 9.8, 9.9. So yes. I guess that's the sort of performance change that we're looking at. But to say that it's just strength and conditioning that's done that, I think it's really hard to narrow down. But we do know that we've increased muscle mass in these guys, that increases their power, and then we do see them riding faster on the track.
Yeah. Now, so for say an endurance coach, so for an endurance coach coaching endurance cyclists, you would still say that measuring the lean muscle mass is an important factor if the goal is to increase strength, increase power.
Yeah. So it's as I said before. So increased muscle mass is probably looking at more your peak power. Yes. Increased strength is probably just as important for an endurance athlete. So if you can increase strength, the ideal thing for an endurance athlete is if you can increase strength without the increase in lean muscle mass. That is ideal, because then you're actually increasing your power to weight by even more.
Wow.
So that's the ideal. Increase strength without increasing.
Is it possible?
It is possible. So with that, a couple of reasons why you do get changes in strength, and one of it is through cross-sectional area of the muscle, so you increase the size of the muscle, and the other one is just through changes that happen inside the muscle and how, I guess, the firing rate, all those little things that happen to make the muscle more efficient in generating force. So you can do that without actually increasing the muscle mass.
Okay, very cool. Do you have any advice? Let's say we have cyclists, endurance cyclists, we have triathletes who want to say, okay, I listened to what you guys are talking here, Matt. I'm convinced, I'm buying into this. I need to hit the gym. So do you have any advice for time crunch cyclists and triathletes who wants to get into strength and conditioning to improve their performance? Do you have any training tips or advice that you can give us?
I'd say probably start conservative. As you said right at the start, if a cyclist or any athlete hasn't done any type of strength training before, if they go hard to start with, they're going to be too sore to actually perform what they want to do. So everyone that probably follows your show loves cycling, and they don't want anything to get in the way of that cycling. So if you go to the gym and all of a sudden try and lift heavy squats or deadlifts or leg press or whatever you do, and you're too sore to ride for the next 3 or 4 days, it's going to turn you off pretty quick. So I'd say start conservative, low reps and low sets, just until your muscles become adapted to the type of training you're going to do. Once they do become adapted, you've obviously haven't got a lot of time, because most of your focus is going to be out on the road. Yes. So think about, I guess, moving, not necessarily lifting heavy, but whenever you do a contraction, think about it being maximal. So you can do bodyweight stuff, but if you do it fast, then that means you're using the muscles, using every muscle fiber you have. If you just do it slowly, most people who are endurance cyclists are going to train at low intensity most of the time. So when you're in the gym, make that a high intensity workout. So again, make sure you start conservative, low reps, low sets, low weights, but once you become adapted to what you're doing, that's when you can start to increase the velocity of the movement. I still wouldn't be trying to lift maximal one rep maxes,
sure.
that type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's more lower load, but try and move the weight fast. Because as I said before, most of your training is done at lower intensity, low relative intensity. Even if you're doing a 5-minute intervals at threshold, you still, if you're doing 100 revolutions a minute, you're still doing 500 reps, which is in essence is pretty low intensity if you think about it like that.
Yes.
So when you're in the gym, make sure that the reps you do are actually meaningful, because you're getting enough of the volume on the road.
Yes. Now, what are the things that what are the advantages of gym workout? Using barbells, using kettlebells, using dumbbells versus body weight training. Because with the lockdown happening in different parts of the world, lots of people have switched into, okay, I'm going to do HIIT sessions today. I'm going to do 50 reps of air squats. So what is the difference between lifting, say, barbells with plates versus doing the body weight stuff for an endurance cyclist?
Yeah, so we do both. We'll do body weight stuff, and we'll do resisted weights as well. I guess the advantage of having an external load is you can increase that load to create overload. If you're just doing body weight, it's really hard to increase the load. So what you might do is if you have got kettlebells or dumbbells, you just need to change the exercise. So a single leg squat can still be really hard if it's done with body weight, if it's done correctly. So you don't need to be squatting 150 kilos to get a workout. That for our guys who've got a high training age, that's beneficial. But if you're just starting out, that's the last thing I'd recommend.
Yes.
So you can do things like glute bridging, you can do single leg squats, you can do step ups, you can do all this type of stuff. If it's done, as I said before, if it's done maximally. So if you might do a step up, and at the top of the step up, you actually power off the box. So you're almost jumping at the top. So it's a maximal contraction. You might do glute bridges, where if you do these things powerfully and do them quick, you can get a good work out of them. It's obviously different. It's easier with an external load, but you can still do things. If you do a single leg squat, if you do it from the ground, it's actually really hard. I challenge anyone that's never done weights before.
Yes.
Single leg squat off the ground. So,
yes.
These little things that you can do, and you don't need any external load for them. I guess the advantage of having the barbell is when you do get stronger and more advanced, then you can actually add external load.
Yeah. So that's good tips there, Matt. Don't start conservative, low reps, low loads, and then gain that proficiency, that muscle memory, that efficiency, and confidence on the movement before we head on to heavier loads. And you gave a good tip. We can maintain the load but increase the velocity, the speed of which we do the lifts. That itself will force adaptation and make the muscles work faster. And you define that as a higher quality workout, a higher intensity workout, versus comparing that, moving the barbell up really quickly versus cycling for 5 minutes interval or a 3-hour endurance ride. That when we compare the two, that is actually a difference in terms of quality and intensity. So that was a good tip.
Yeah, and then when you go back to why you do these things in the gym, that's the reason why you do it, because you're getting something you can't get on the track or on the road. If you do as I said, a 5-minute all-out effort, it's, as I said, still 500 reps probably. Whereas in the gym, you can actually overload by doing shorter reps. So it's about the gym is about trying to get things that you can't get on the track.
Yes.
Which is why when you're in there, when I say track or road, whatever type of cycling you're doing. So always think about what the goal of the session is. I know people think I need to work on my endurance, so I want to try and do this. So they do really, really high reps. But what you're doing is you're just repeating more of what you're doing when you're on the bike. So think about why you're doing it.
Yes. And being in the gym actually gives us variety, isn't it? We spend time in the track, we spend time on the road, we spend time in the gym. So different training, different exposures, different exercises actually provides different stimulus. And that's also an important part of training. We need variety. We can't train the same thing over and over again. That would not bring us that adaptation. That's not going to bring us improvement. Now, final thoughts. Matt, that you can give us final advice, last word from you. How can why should endurance athletes, endurance cyclists, endurance athletes, triathletes go into strength training? Your final thoughts, please.
Yeah, so as I said before, if you can increase your strength, then whatever load, first of all, it will increase, or when I say will, it should increase your peak power. So if you're stronger, you should be able to produce more peak power, but it actually means that when you're working at a lower intensity, that intensity becomes a less of a relative intensity for you. So as I said before, if you're riding at 300 watts, well, that 300 watts, if you're stronger, in theory, should be easy for you to hold on to. So, so if you're a track sprinter or if you're something who does maximal efforts, then there's a clear reason there that if you can increase your muscle mass, then that should increase the peak power on the bike as well. So there's variety. It's, as you said, rather than just doing all the same thing all the time, it gives you something else to focus on. Yeah, there's plenty of reasons. Injury prevention, which we haven't even spoke about.
Yeah, true that.
Cycling is a cyclical sport where you're doing the same thing the whole time. So what the gym can do, that can actually even out any muscle imbalances you might get. A lot of people who ride a lot get a lot of patellofemoral issues through increased vastus lateralis tightness. So there's things there that can actually increase your glutes and your adductors and things that you can't necessarily increase as much on the bike.
Yes.
So it actually has a injury prevention aspect as well as just transfer of force from your upper body and your core that can go through your pedals as well. So there's plenty of reasons there why it's beneficial for cyclists and triathletes.
Thank you so much, Matt. So guys, thank you very much, Matt, for this wonderful session. Lots of tips, lots of good advices, practical suggestions that's been packed into this session. And once again, thank you guys for tuning in and watching this week's Speedster's live chat. If this is something that you enjoy and you like, please subscribe to the channel, hit the bell button so you will never miss another of our new sessions coming up. So Matt, thank you very much again for your time, and God bless you. And for you guys sitting at home watching this, until the next episode then. See you next week. Bye.
Thank you.